Daniel had always been a man of habit. His life as a space engineer was simple compared to the adventures of explorers and fighters he sometimes met at starports. He enjoyed fixing machines, adjusting engines, and checking the smallest details that kept ships alive in the cold emptiness of space. That day he had left his station earlier than usual. His ship was floating near the edge of an asteroid belt, far from the busy routes of traders. He was running a routine check on his scanners when something strange appeared. At first he thought it was nothing more than broken metal drifting among the rocks. Just another piece of junk lost in space. But when the signal flashed again, he leaned closer to the screen. It wasn't just junk. The scanner picked up weak life readings. That was unusual. Out there, so far from any known colony, the chances of finding someone alive inside a drifting object were almost impossible. Daniel hesitated for only a moment. Curiosity and duty pushed him to investigate. He adjusted his ship's path, carefully moving closer to the object. As the shadow of the asteroids passed, he finally saw it with his own eyes. It was a pod, small, damaged, and spinning slowly in the void. One side was scorched as if it had survived an explosion or a heavy attack. His heart beat faster as his ship drew alongside. He activated the magnetic grapplers and pulled the pod toward his docking bay. As it settled with a dull thud, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the steady hum of his ship's engines. Daniel grabbed his helmet and rushed down to the bay. The pod looked worse up close. Its surface was cracked, wires hung loose, and the faint light inside flickered weakly. He pressed a hand against the glass, wiping away the frost that had gathered. What he saw on the other side made him freeze in shock. A child. It was not human, but the shape was clear. Small arms curled close to its chest. Face pressed against the side of the pod. Its skin glowed faintly, a pale shade that shimmered as if reflecting hidden light. Thin lines like patterns ran across its body. The child's breathing was shallow, lips trembling as if fighting for air. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He didn't understand what species this child belonged to, but in that instant, he didn't care. All he saw was a living child struggling to survive. Without hesitation, he pulled out his tools and forced the pod open. A hiss escaped as the seals broke. The weak air inside made him cough, but he ignored it. Gently, he lifted the child into his arms. The body was lighter than he expected, fragile like carrying glass. The child whimpered faintly, eyes opening for just a second, large, bright, and filled with fear, before closing again. Daniel carried the child to the medical corner of his ship. He quickly adjusted the oxygen levels, placing a breathing mask near the small mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the child's breathing steadied. Daniel let out the breath he had been holding, relief washing over him. He sat back, studying the child more closely. The patterns on its skin moved gently, glowing faintly with each heartbeat. The clothing was strange, delicate material torn and burned at the edges. It was clear the pod had been meant as an escape vessel. That meant somewhere out in the dark, a bigger disaster had happened. Maybe a ship destroyed, maybe an attack. He didn't know. Daniel shook his head. The details didn't matter right now. The only thing that mattered was that the child was alive. He adjusted the systems again, making sure the temperature stayed stable. The child stirred, eyes opening once more. This time the gaze lingered. Those eyes were unlike anything he had ever seen. Large, almost liquid, shining like twin stars. They carried fear but also trust, as if recognizing the safety in his presence. "It's okay," Daniel whispered softly, though he knew the child couldn't understand his language. Still, the tone seemed to calm it. The child blinked slowly, and then, exhausted, drifted back into sleep. Daniel stayed there for a long time, watching over the fragile figure. His mind raced. He knew the risks. Taking in an unknown life form was dangerous. The child could carry diseases humans weren't immune to. There could be enemies searching for it. His ship might already be on someone's scanners. And yet, none of that mattered to him. His first thought had not been about safety or danger. It had been about life. the life of a child who could not protect itself. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Memories of his own childhood flickered. He remembered the times when he had been helpless, relying on others for protection. Somewhere deep in his heart, he knew he could never have turned away. No matter the species, no matter the cost, protecting a child was the most natural thing for him to do. As the hours passed, Daniel continued his checks, making sure the child remained stable. He adjusted the translator device, though it only picked up scattered signals when the child made small sounds in its sleep. Perhaps with time, he could find a way to communicate. For now, the silence was enough. He looked out of the window at the endless stretch of stars. Somewhere out there, he thought, someone must be looking for this child. A family. A people. Maybe even an entire race. Whoever they were, he hoped they had the same heart he did. The heart that cared more for life than for fear or war. But deep inside, Daniel also knew this discovery would change everything. A lone human engineer carrying an alien child found drifting in space was not a small matter. If the wrong people found out, trouble would follow. Still, as he glanced back at the child resting peacefully under the soft glow of the lights, Daniel made a quiet promise to himself. He would protect this child. No matter who came, no matter the cost, he would not abandon the life that had been placed in his care. And in that moment, far away from any human eyes, a simple engineer had unknowingly stepped onto a path that would lead him into the center of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The quiet hum of the ship filled the air as Daniel checked the readings again. The child's breathing had become steady, and its glowing skin patterns pulsed like gentle waves. Daniel felt relief, but his mind was restless. He had questions he could not answer. Who was this child? Where had it come from? Why had its escape pod been drifting so far from any known path? The child stirred again, small fingers curling as it woke. Its eyes opened wide, shimmering like pools of light. When it looked at Daniel, there was a mixture of fear and curiosity. Daniel raised his hand slowly, palms open, to show he meant no harm. He had worked with machines all his life, but in that moment, he found himself wishing he knew how to comfort a child that wasn't even human. He searched through his supplies and found a nutrient pack. It wasn't designed for alien biology, but he adjusted the settings on his medical tools to scan the child's vitals. After careful testing, he prepared a safe mixture of liquid. He held it up and gestured, showing the child it was for drinking. At first, the child hesitated, watching him with suspicion. Then, after a long pause, it reached out with trembling hands and accepted the drink. As the child sipped slowly, Daniel noticed the way its eyes softened. It no longer looked only frightened. It looked as though it was beginning to trust. That small moment warmed Daniel's heart more than he expected. He spoke gently, even though he knew his words would not be understood. "You're safe here. I won't let anything happen to you." The child tilted its head as if trying to make sense of his voice. It made a soft sound, musical and strange, filled with emotion. Daniel activated his translator device, but the words were too broken to translate clearly. Still, one thing was clear. The child was trying to communicate. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. Daniel fixed parts of the ship while keeping an eye on the child. Slowly, it began to move around the cabin. It touched objects with curiosity, fascinated by the lights and sounds. Sometimes it would glance back at him as though checking if it was still safe. Each time, Daniel gave a small nod or smile, and the child relaxed. Just as Daniel was beginning to believe they might have some time to figure things out, the alarms of his ship blared. He rushed to the control deck and froze. Multiple signals appeared on the scanner. Ships, not small ones either. Patrol crafts, fast and armed. They were closing in quickly. His heart sank. He had been careful, but clearly the damaged pod had been tracked or detected. Whoever the child belonged to, they were powerful enough to send patrols into deep space. Daniel knew his small ship couldn't outrun them for long. Within minutes, the patrol crafts surrounded him. A voice echoed through. The communication system, firm and cold. Human vessel, you are carrying what does not belong to you. Release the air immediately or face destruction. Daniel's hands tightened on the controls. He glanced at the child who had pressed against the door of the cabin, fear shining in its eyes. The word air struck him deeply. This was not just any alien child. This was someone important, maybe even royal. The patrols were not here for rescue alone. They were here to take control. Daniel pressed the communicator and answered calmly. This child is not my prisoner. I found the pod drifting damaged. Without me, it would not be alive right now. The voice on the other side was sharp. Human lies mean nothing. Release the air. Daniel felt a storm rising inside him. He was only one man in a simple ship. These patrols could destroy him in an instant. But when he looked at the child again, trembling and helpless, he knew he could not give in so easily. He leaned closer to the mic and spoke with steady courage. I will not hand over this child until I know it will be safe. If you want it, prove to me you mean no harm. The silence that followed was heavy. He could almost feel the shock of the patrols at his words. No one dared to challenge an empire, especially not a lone human engineer. Yet Daniel had spoken without hesitation. The patrol ships closed in, weapons glowing faintly, but they did not fire. Finally, the voice returned, colder than before. You are a fool, human. The Queen herself will decide your fate. Daniel exhaled slowly as the ships locked onto his vessel. Escape was no longer an option. His small ship was pulled into a tractor beam, drawn toward a massive cruiser that had arrived in the distance. The child clung to him as the ship shook from the force. He placed a reassuring hand on its shoulder. Don't be afraid. I'll be right here. The closer they came to the cruiser, the more Daniel realized the scale of what he was facing. The alien ship was enormous, like a floating city, its design elegant yet powerful. Lights pulsed along its surface, and its energy field shimmered with strength that could crush his vessel in seconds. When his ship was finally locked into a docking bay, armed guards surrounded it. The doors opened, and Daniel stepped out slowly, carrying the child in his arms. The guards raised their weapons, but when they saw the air safe, they lowered them slightly. Still, their eyes stayed fixed on him with suspicion and anger. The child buried its face against Daniel's shoulder, refusing to let go. That small gesture gave him courage. He walked forward, unarmed, surrounded by soldiers of a mighty empire. In his heart, Daniel knew he was stepping into something far greater than himself. He didn't know what awaited him: punishment, imprisonment, or worse. But one thing was certain: he would not regret his choice. When he had found the pod, he hadn't hesitated to protect the child. And even now, under the shadow of an empire's power, he felt no regret. Because sometimes the right thing to do was the simplest, even if it was also the most dangerous, and deep within the vast halls of the cruiser, someone had already been told about him. The Queen herself knew of the human who had dared to protect her child, and she was waiting to see the man bold enough to challenge her empire. The great alien cruiser moved with quiet power, its halls alive with strange lights and sounds. Daniel walked through those halls, surrounded by guards on all sides. Their armor glowed faintly, their faces hidden under helmets that looked sharp and unreadable. Every step echoed against the polished floor, reminding him that he was far from his world, far from anything familiar. The child was still in his arms, holding tightly as if afraid of being taken away. Daniel whispered softly, to reassure it even though he was unsure whether the words were understood. The soldiers kept silent. They only led him forward, deeper into the heart of the ship. Finally, they reached an enormous chamber. The doors opened with a low hum, and Daniel felt his breath catch. The hall was like nothing he had ever seen before. High pillars reached toward a ceiling that shimmered with energy. Strange symbols glowed on the walls, telling stories of victories in history long before humans had learned to travel among stars. At the far end stood a throne, raised high, glowing with silver light, and upon it sat the Queen. Daniel froze. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Tall and graceful, her presence filled the chamber without a single word. Her skin carried the same patterns as the child, but brighter, flowing like rivers of light across her form. Her eyes were sharp, yet gentle, filled with power and something deeper. Worry, perhaps even sorrow. She rose slowly, her gaze fixed, on the child in Daniel's arms. The soldiers bowed deeply, but Daniel only stood still. He didn't know the customs, and he had no plan other than to protect the little one. The child looked up, eyes widening, and let out a sound. Soft, longing, filled with emotion. The queen's expression shifted instantly. The look of a ruler became the look of a mother. She stepped forward quickly, and the soldiers parted at once. Daniel hesitated. The child clung to him, afraid of being taken. For a moment he thought of refusing to hand it over, but then he saw the tears forming in the queen's bright eyes. She reached out, and in her face there was no anger, no threat, only a mother desperate to hold her child again. The child finally loosened its grip, sliding from Daniel's arms into hers. The queen embraced it, pressing her face against the small, glowing figure, whispering words in a language Daniel didn't understand, but felt deep in his heart. The entire chamber went silent as the reunion unfolded. Daniel took a small step back, watching quietly. Relief filled him. Whatever happened next, at least the child was safe. After a long moment, the queen looked up at him. Her eyes, though softened by love for her child, now held a piercing focus. She spoke, her voice strong yet smooth, carrying across the hall. "Human," she said through the translator device placed nearby. "You saved my child when you did not have to. You risked your life for one who is not of your kind. Tell me, why?" Daniel felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him. He stood straight, though his heart raced. He had no speech prepared, no clever words. All he had was the truth. "I didn't think about it," he said simply. "I saw a child struggling to breathe. I couldn't leave it to die. A child is a child. Protecting them is not a choice. It is something you just do." The chamber remained quiet. The queen studied him for a long time. Some of the council, members standing nearby, exchanged doubtful glances. To them, humans were unknown, sometimes considered selfish or weak. They couldn't believe a man would risk everything for no gain. But the queen kept her gaze on him, searching for any sign of lies. She saw none. Daniel's eyes held only honesty. She lowered her head slightly, whispering something to her child, who nodded and clung closer to her. Then she straightened, addressing him again. "Many fear my empire. Many obey only because they are forced. Yet you, a stranger with no reason to care, chose to protect what is most precious to me. For that, you have earned my respect." Daniel exhaled slowly, relieved that she did not see him as an enemy. Still, the council did not remain silent. One of the advisors stepped forward, voice sharp. "Your Majesty, humans are unpredictable. This one might be lying. He could have taken the heir for ransom or power. We cannot trust his words alone." Murmurs of agreement echoed. Daniel stayed calm, though his jaw tightened. He knew he couldn't convince everyone with words. Actions would speak louder, but what kind of actions would be enough? The queen raised her hand, silencing the voices around her. "Enough. He has spoken his truth, but I will see for myself whether his heart is as pure as his words." Her eyes returned to Daniel, steady and commanding. "You have shown courage. Human. Yet courage is proven not in words but in trials. If you truly protected my child without thought of gain, then you will not refuse when I test you." Daniel swallowed hard. He had no idea what kind of test she meant, but he nodded. "If it proves the child is safe, I will do it." The queen's eyes softened slightly at his answer, but her voice remained firm. "Then you shall be given a chance. Tomorrow you will face a task set by this council. Only then will they believe what I already see in you." The councilors seemed satisfied, though some still glared at him with distrust. The guards escorted Daniel back to a chamber, not as a prisoner but not free either. As he walked away, he glanced back once more. The queen was still holding her child, eyes full of relief, and for the first time he saw her, not just as a ruler of a mighty empire, but as a mother who had nearly lost everything. When the doors closed behind him, Daniel sat in silence. His heart was heavy, but not with fear. Instead, he felt a strange sense of purpose. He had come this far, not for glory or recognition, but because protecting that child had been the right thing to do. Now he realized his actions had drawn him into the center of something far larger than he could ever imagine. He did not know what test awaited him, but one thought stayed clear in his mind. Whatever happened next, he would face it the same way he had faced the drifting pod in space, without hesitation. The chamber Daniel was given for the night was quiet but strange. The walls glowed faintly with patterns that shifted like flowing water. Food had been left for him, though he ate little. His mind was restless. He replayed the Queen's words in his head: a trial, a test. What kind of task could an empire set for a lone human engineer? Sleep was difficult. When he finally closed his eyes, images of the child's frightened face filled his dreams. He woke to the sound of the door opening. Guards stood waiting. Without a word, they led him through long corridors until they reached another vast hall. The Queen was there, seated again on her shining throne. The council members stood around her, their expressions sharp and doubtful. The child was there too, sitting safely beside its mother, watching Daniel with wide eyes. The sight gave him strength. The Queen raised her hand and the hall went silent. "Human," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You speak of protecting the weak. You claim you ask for nothing in return. Today you will prove it." One of the counselors stepped forward holding a small device. "There is a colony," the advisor explained, "where our children suffer from an illness. They need medicine, but the route is dangerous. The supply ships are delayed, and the sickness spreads quickly. If you wish to prove your words are true, you will take the medicine through the hostile zone and deliver it to them." Daniel listened carefully. "Why me?" he asked. "Because," the Queen replied, "you could refuse. You could demand safety or reward. But if you mean what you said, that a child is a child no matter where, then you will not refuse this task." Daniel nodded. He had already decided. "I'll do it." The counselors whispered among themselves, surprised by how quickly he agreed. The Queen only watched him, her eyes steady, as if searching his soul once again. Then she gave a slight nod. The medicine was brought out, a small container glowing faintly with protective seals. Daniel held it carefully. Within hours, he was aboard a small vessel the Empire provided. It was fast but lightly armed, meant for speed rather than battle. The guards explained the path. He had to cross a zone of asteroids often used by raiders and scavengers. It was dangerous, but it was the only way to reach the colony in time. Daniel set off, the stars stretching out before him. His hands moved over the controls with steady focus. He was an engineer, not a fighter, but years of working with machines had given him skill. The ship moved smoothly under his care. The first part of the journey was calm, but soon the scanner picked up movement. Small ships appeared, their signals unmarked. Raiders. Daniel tightened his grip. They were fast and aggressive, circling him like predators. One of them sent a message: "Surrender your cargo, human, or we'll tear you apart." Daniel's mind raced. He could not fight them, not with this small vessel. But surrendering was not an option either. He thought of the sick children waiting for the medicine. He thought of the Queen's child, who might have been among them if fate had been different. He had to find another way. He cut power suddenly, letting the ship drift as if disabled. The raiders closed in, ready to board. But while their scanners showed weakness, Daniel's hands worked quickly. He rerouted the ship's energy into a sudden burst of speed. In an instant, the vessel shot forward, weaving between asteroids. The raiders gave chase, but Daniel's skill with engines kept him one step ahead. The chase was long, filled with near collisions and sudden turns. Sweat dripped down his face as alarms blared, but he never let go of the controls. Piece by piece, he used the asteroids themselves as shields, tricking the raiders into smashing against rocks or losing track of him. Finally, only silence remained. The scanner showed no more ships. Exhausted but determined, Daniel pushed the vessel onward. Hours later, the colony came into view. It was a small settlement, domes shining faintly on the barren surface of a moon. As he landed, groups of people rushed to meet him. Their eyes were tired, their faces lined with worry. The moment they saw the medicine, their expressions changed to relief and gratitude. Children too weak to stand were carried forward by their families. Daniel watched as the healers took the medicine and began their work immediately. Slowly, color returned to the children's faces. The sound of laughter, faint but real, filled the air again. One of the elders approached Daniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We will not forget this," the elder said. "You saved our little ones." Daniel smiled faintly, shaking his head. "I only did what anyone should do." He stayed until he was sure the medicine was working, then returned to the ship. As he left, the children waved weakly, their glowing eyes filled with hope. When he finally returned to the Queen's hall, the council was waiting. The Queen's child ran forward, smiling, as if sensing his success. Daniel bowed his head slightly, setting the empty container before the Queen. "The medicine is delivered," he said simply. The hall went silent again. The counselors looked at each other, their doubts shaken. This man had faced danger with nothing to gain, yet he had succeeded. The Queen stood, her eyes soft but shining. "You have proven what I already knew," she said. "Your heart is true." The great hall was filled with whispers. The counselors who had doubted Daniel before now spoke in low voices, uncertain what to say. Some bowed their heads in respect, while others remained silent, their pride keeping them from admitting they had been wrong. The Queen, however, showed no hesitation. She stepped down from her throne, walking across the floor until she stood before Daniel. Her child was beside her, clutching her hand but looking at Daniel with bright, grateful eyes. "You carried my heir when no one else could," the Queen said. "You protected without asking who the child was, and now you have saved many more of our young. You acted not for reward, but because it was right. For this, I owe you more than words." Daniel shifted uneasily. He was not used to such praise. "I didn't do it for honor," he said. "I just couldn't walk away." The Queen studied him, and then her voice softened. "That is why you are worthy. Others would speak of duty. Others would seek reward. But you, human, you chose without hesitation. And for that I wish you to remain by my side." Her words struck the chamber like thunder. The counselors gasped, for their Queen to speak so openly was rare. She did not speak of him as a servant nor a prisoner. She spoke of him as someone she valued, someone she wanted near. Daniel was stunned. He had expected punishment, or at best, to be allowed to leave. The idea of staying at the side of a ruler in a world not his own was almost beyond his understanding. He glanced at the child, who smiled at him with innocence and trust. That look stirred something deep in him. "Why me?" Daniel asked quietly. The Queen's gaze was firm. "Because you showed us a truth many of my people have forgotten. Power is not in ships or weapons. Power is in the heart that chooses to protect. I want my child to grow learning from someone like you, and I want my people to see that even among the stars, there are those who value life above all." The chamber remained silent. Slowly, the child let go of its mother's hand and walked forward. It tugged at Daniel's arm and held on tightly, as if making the decision for him. Daniel knelt slightly, smiling at the little one, and felt the warmth of belonging. He stood again, meeting the Queen's eyes. "If I stay, I will stay not as a soldier or ruler. I will stay as myself, someone who protects what is right." The Queen nodded. "That is all I ask." From that day, Daniel's life changed. He was given a place of honor in the empire, though he wore no crown and held no title. The people learned of the human who had saved their children, and slowly, their suspicion faded into respect. He was seen walking beside the Queen, not as a servant but as a companion she trusted. The child never forgot him either. Wherever Daniel went, the little one followed, laughing and learning. Together they walked through the shining cities of the Empire, symbols of hope for both alien and human. And though Daniel sometimes looked out at the stars, remembering the quiet life he once had as an engineer, he never felt regret. His path had changed the moment he opened that damaged pod and chose to act without hesitation. Now his choice had shaped not only his life but the bond between two worlds. He had protected a child without hesitation, and in return he had found a place where he was no longer a stranger, but someone deeply wanted, by a queen, by her child, and by an empire that had learned to see humans in a new light.